The book that I'm talking about today is a joint with George Akerlof, who is, well, he was at UC Berkeley, and now he had to go because of his wife to Washington, he followed his wife to Washington, D.C., and he's now professor at Georgetown University. So he was already, well, we started working on this book, which I'm talking about now, even before I was speaking here last time. It was already, a project was underway for 2 years, but I didn't want to scoop our book yet when I spoke here last. The title, so the book actually emerged from a paper that George Akerlof wrote in 1993 with Paul Romer, who's now a university professor at New York University. And it was called Looting: The Economics of Bankruptcy for Profit. And it was published in the Brookings Papers at Brookings Institution, Washington. And it was an expose of some bizarre things that happen when businessmen are not completely honest. The revelation in that paper, it struck me as, it's just interesting to see what dishonest activities may be encouraged by a financial system. So the thing about that paper is it questioned the assumption. We normally assume businesses are out there to make a profit and to do well, right? Well, not always. Sometimes there's a secret business plan. We are going to go bankrupt, but we're going to tunnel the money out to our friends before we go bankrupt. And that's what they documented in their paper. Their paper was about a financial crisis that occurred around 1990. After it was called the savings and loan crisis, and there were a lot of savings and loan, which are a kind of bank that were in Texas especially. There was some sort of creeping dishonesty going out in Texas. Everyone's doing it, you know, let's do it too. And it involved, this was right after Ronald Reagan had started deregulation. But Ronald Reagan forgot one important fact. The government was running deposit insurance for banks, okay? Insurance companies have to be, it's a government insurance, but just like any insurance company, you got to be careful. If you're insuring somebody, you better watch out that they're not deliberately causing the crisis that will cause you to pay out, because then you'll go under. You've got to watch them. If you're doing fire insurance, you have to go and make sure that they have fire extinguishers around, that they're taking the precautions. And if the building burns down, you have to have arson detectors to detect whether they might have burned their own building down. Same thing happens here. And what happened is that savings and loans associations had complicated schemes involving tricks that they were playing to deceive the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation, now defunct. It was shut down because the collapse of the savings and loans cost the government, the U.S. federal government, in insurance compensation. In today's dollars, something like $250 billion. It was absolutely huge. And it brought on the recession of 1990-91. So these guys were crooks, real crooks. They did things, they were doctoring their books. They did things like buy some cheap, worthless land around their city, and then they'd sell it to a friend at a higher price, and then another friend would buy it at a higher price. It was all fake, so the land was valued highly, and they managed to use that as collateral for loans. On the books, everything looks fine, but in fact, they were planning to go bankrupt. And they would hire phony developers who would be building some apartment complex, and they weren't really building it, they were taking the money and running. This is crooked behavior. Now, I'm not saying that crooked behavior to that extreme is very common, but if you see it at that extreme and you see it spreading, it's a word to the wise, right? You should understand that these things happen. So I talked to George Akerlof and said, this is really interesting. We should try to think more about the about the implications of this. And that's what we did with this book. So we wrote, this is now the dark side of economics. And I want to make it clear that I don't have a dark view of people. I tend to trust and like people, and I think there's a good side to everyone. But the problem is that a free market system that's not patrolled creates opportunities for fraud, and something less than fraud, something that might be honest in terms, if you read the whole document, but some facts might be buried in the document so that you don't see them, and it can be deceptive. This is a fundamental problem. So we decided to call our book "Fishing for Fools." It's a little, or the subtitle is "The Economics of Manipulation and Deception." Probably some of these things are deceptive, right? Some of these companies were playing tricks. I'm just pointing randomly. I don't know what's over there. This happens. Things happen. The idea then, well, fishing we spell with a PH. You know this word. It has a meaning, which this word in the English language is only about 20 years old. It came in with the internet. Phishing refers to any tactic to steal someone's personal information on email or the internet. So you send an email claiming to be from some trusted source, and you say, "Oh, we need your password again." Okay, and you've learned not to submit your password in answering probably, I hope you've learned not to give your password. But we thought that's a metaphor for a more broad kind of deception. So we'll use that because you're very much aware of phishing in that sense. And it also brings to mind also the extreme development of new technology, which I think is offering more and more opportunities. They keep coming. Technology keeps bringing new phishing opportunities, and you thought you were safe, and then you find out that there's another chink in your armor. Our book, or we wanted our book, to be a book about civil society. Which is not in the model, the efficient markets model. The efficient markets, free market model talks about everybody operating in his or her self-interest. You're maximizing your utility subject to a budget constraint. That's the free market model. But it's not, I think that we need to think about something more. The reason why the United States is such a successful country is partly because we have relatively free markets, but it's also because we have a civil society. Now, let me explain that term. The term goes back to Aristotle, if you take it back. He called it koinonia politica. That's Greek. And if I said that right, I'm not Greek. It's been translated as civil society. And then, that was, when was that, like 400 BC, something like that. And then Cicero, the Roman senator, wrote about this again, in Latin, of course, and he called it Societas Civilis. I'm not pronouncing my Latin right either. And he had a similar meaning. What is civil society? It's a nation that has some sense of concern for each other. We have a sense of goodwill, and that we feel that we bear responsibility for each other. So that the government is our servant. We are watching the government, all of us, and we are not suppressed. We're free. So we openly criticize the government. And society understands that the government gets its, I'm talking this sounds like the Declaration of Independence. It gets its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. And the governed have to be informed, and they keep themselves informed.